Hi, I'm Amanda Madden with the Society for Italian Historical Studies. And today we're here to talk to this year's prize winner for the best article in medieval and early modern studies, Erin Maglaque. Erin, welcome. Congratulations on winning the prize. It's a wonderful article.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Excellent. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions so our viewers can hear a little bit more about your work.
Right.
Yeah, I look forward to our discussion today. So I really enjoyed reading this article as an early modernist, your article really does provide some interesting insights on the nature and value of women's work in early modern Italy. Can you tell us a bit more about your work and how it fits into how this article fits into the bigger picture of your scholarship?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I have a long-standing interest in gender history, and so it sort of fits into that kind of wider trajectory. My first book, I was really interested in gender in the early modern Venetian Empire in this kind of multi-confessional, multi-ethnic Mediterranean world, and I was looking at the patrician men who were kind of colonial governors, and then married women who were actually their own subjects, so who were perhaps Greek Orthodox, and these mixed marriages. But when I finished that book, I really wanted to move beyond the kind of patriciate and to look at the experiences of ordinary women, and particularly experiences of kind of ordinary motherhood. The patriciate is obviously fascinating, and the sources are kind of incredible for that kind of group of people. But I wanted a bit more of a challenge, and I wanted to kind of get at these experiences of ordinary women. And I think also it was a personal preoccupation. I had a baby and now have a toddler, and so the very delicate balance between paid work and care work is very much on my mind in a kind of personal capacity too. And then I guess the kind of last thing that sort of drew me in this direction is I really felt like within early modern history more broadly, the kind of ongoing debates about women's work, I think, are kind of one of the most vibrant areas of the field. There's these sort of huge projects on early modern England and Sweden, and a lot of scholarship on Italy too. And it just felt like such a kind of vibrant and interesting area to be working, where there were really kind of current debates about methodology, about the gender division of labor, about this kind of relationship between paid and unpaid work, which I find so fascinating. And so I think all of those kind of things together drew me into this world of sort of how ordinary women navigated this like really difficult boundary, I think, between undertaking paid work for the market and reproductive labor. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very, very interesting to hear that you've moved from, patrician women and the patriciate in the Venetian Empire to Tuscany. I do want to ask you a little bit about your archival material, because it's always interesting to hear more about the sources that one works with to do particular work in women and gender during this period. And it seems as if the archival material used for the study are particularly underutilized. You don't read much about people working in these particular documents. But my question for you is, as you're doing work on women and gender, sources are, as you alluded to, are often an issue. Are there any other collections in the state archives that you can think of that may actually tell us more about the history of women and gender?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like when I was starting on this article, in some ways, the kind of, the history of the family in medieval and early modern Tuscany is a really important field with this kind of really long genealogy. It's some of like the earliest social history, right, is done on these kind of Tuscan archival sources, because they are, so incredible and so rich and so detailed in a way that other cities at that point in time, right, don't really offer. But yeah, I mean, so I was drawn to the Innocenti archives because, it's the archive of this charitable institution of the Foundling Hospital, and it has so many different kinds of records that sort of overlap in ways that allow you to get at experiences of work that are otherwise undocumented. But I think in general, the archives of these charitable institutions, of hospitals and things like that, are so important for the study of women's history, gender history, and also the history of childhood, I think, which is the kind of missing piece of that conversation too. I was working actually in Siena earlier this summer on the archives of Santa Maria della Scala, which is another, which is a hospital which has many different functions, but includes a foundling hospital. And I think it's always been difficult to understand their foundling hospital because the archives don't exist before the 18th century, really, for the activities, surrounding wet nursing and things like that. But when I was working there, I got interested in these series of records that detail the farm estates and the kind of the administration of their rural lands from within Siena. And that gave all of this kind of unexpected insight into what women and children were doing on the farms. They ran their own court. So there were some really interesting cases of women coming up for fraud before the court. So that gives like amazing detail about women, kind of making cheese and selling it on the black market and all these things that I find like so fascinating. So I think it's not even necessarily kind of, the undiscovered archival fond, which is, I know what we kind of all dream of as archival historians, but more kind of approaching, these sources slightly from like a bit of a different angle or a bit more creatively. The farm records, I think, are such a good example of that, because actually when the hospital went and did the visitations, they didn't even record the number of women living on the farm. So they totted up all the numbers of men. So you actually just have to just subtract from the total to find how many women there were, which on the one hand is like, oh, they're completely erased from this kind of record. But, using court records and things like that, you can sort of piece it together in ways that you might not sort of expect to be able to do when you first get to the archive. Yeah.
Great. That's very, very interesting. I look forward to hearing more about these sources as your work develops. Speaking of work developing, is this a larger project that you're working on, or where are you going with this particular this particular project?
Yeah, so the article in Past and Present, I think, is kind of like the first case study of what I'm hoping will be a book project on care work in early modern Tuscany. So that is looking at really wet nursing and the kind of relationship between wet nursing and mothering as paid versus unpaid labor. But I'm hoping to kind of expand this more broadly. I'm really interested in so there's like this great political theorist, Nancy Fraser, who talks about the division between reproductive labor and paid work for the market as being historically contingent and shifting. And I'm really interested in kind of tracing that negotiation through time, through my own period. So wet nursing was a great example of that. And especially the kind of case of wet nursing fraud, where we can see women getting paid to nurse their own biological children, which it kind of explodes this idea that there's any clean boundary between kind of paid work and unpaid work. So I'm looking at really for kind of other instances of that in different kinds of care work contexts. So for example, on these farms in Siena, I'm just starting to do some research on the ward courts in Lucca because their children basically sued their guardians sometimes for making them work. So there's these kind of interesting there's, I think, an interesting possibility that we might be able to see children kind of articulating some of these boundaries between what kind of work is acceptable within the family and what isn't. Anywhere where there's a boundary being contested between what is work and what isn't work, that kind of, my ears prick up in the archive when I see that kind of thing. Yeah.
It sounds fascinating. I mean, it sounds like you're working with some really, really interesting sources. And again, I look forward to hearing more about it.
Oh, thank you.
So it sounds like you've worked in quite a few archives. So I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite place outside of the archives, whether it's in Venice or Siena or... I know this is a tough question. This is a really hard question.
I think there are things that I love about all of the cities I've worked in. Venice has it's a unique set of challenges. Whenever someone comes to me wanting to work on Venice, I think they probably get an earful maybe. But I think one of the things I really, really loved about working at the Innocenti is they have an amazing cafe on the terrace on top of the building with the most beautiful view of Florence, really great coffee. So after your kind of day scrabbling around in the archives, working really hard, your eyesight is like going, you can go up to the top of the terrace and have this like beautiful, relaxing afternoon. So I think as archives go, that's pretty much the best coffee to work ratio I've found. Yeah.
Well, that sounds wonderful. It sounds incredibly enticing.
It is. I would definitely recommend that as an archive to anyone. They're wonderful and friendly and just, yeah, it's a great place to work. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. And again, look forward to hearing more about your next project. And thank you very much and congratulations again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.